There is a tree that produces 800 pounds of food per year. Plant it once, and it feeds you for 50 years, with a single tree yielding 200 fruits annually, enough to sustain a family of 4. No pesticides required, no chemical fertilizers needed, no replanting necessary. Droughts that kill wheat leave it standing, and storms that destroy corn pass it by. 3,000 years of feeding entire Pacific civilizations without fail came to an abrupt end when the British Empire discovered it. They saw its abundance and had an idea: cheap food for enslaved workers. One of history's most famous naval expeditions launched to bring it to the Caribbean, complete with a mutiny, a captain's impossible survival journey, and the tree's eventual arrival. And that's when the enslaved refused to eat it. 40 years of feeding it to pigs followed instead. This is breadfruit, and almost nobody talks about it anymore. Let me tell you why that's about to change. Joseph Banks sailed to Tahiti in 1769 with Captain James Cook, sent there to observe Venus crossing the sun. Banks noticed something else, though: massive trees with football-sized fruits that smelled like fresh bread when cooked. The Tahitians called it their staff of life, planting it once and harvesting for generations. Banks saw something different: cheap food for the enslaved. American independence had just severed Britain's fish supply to Caribbean sugar plantations, cutting off the protein that kept enslaved workers alive. Plantation owners needed a solution fast. Banks proposed breadfruit with its nutrition, productivity, and effortless growth, all for almost nothing in cost. King George III authorized the mission, and in December 1787, the HMS Bounty left England under Lieutenant William Bligh with simple orders: sail to Tahiti, collect breadfruit plants, transport them to Jamaica, and feed them to the enslaved. A month of trying to round Cape Horn defeated Bligh as storms battered the ship relentlessly. The long route around Africa and across the Indian Ocean took 10 months, and the Bounty finally reached Tahiti in October 1788. And that's when the problem started. Breadfruit plants needed time to mature before they could survive the journey ahead. Bligh and his crew stayed in Tahiti for 5 months while England waited, with the men living ashore, forming relationships with Tahitian women, and experiencing life without naval discipline. April 5, 1789 arrived, and the Bounty departed with over 1,000 potted breadfruit plants filling the ship. 3 weeks later, Fletcher Christian, Bligh's master's mate, led a mutiny that seized the ship and threw Bligh with 18 loyalists into a 23-foot open boat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Every single breadfruit plant went overboard. Pure seamanship saved Bligh, who navigated 3,600 miles to the Dutch East Indies, while one crew member died from hostile natives and others from exposure and starvation. England promoted him upon his return and sent him back out. August 1791 brought the HMS Providence's departure for Tahiti, and this time Bligh succeeded in collecting over 2,000 breadfruit seedlings. The journey proved brutal as the ship's gardener complained of flies, cold, salt spray, inadequate fresh water, and what he called the unwholesomeness of sea air. 678 plants survived. January 1793 marked Bligh's delivery of 180 breadfruit trees to St. Vincent and Jamaica. The mission was complete, the British Empire had its cheap food for the enslaved, and they awarded Bligh a gold medal for his troubles. Nobody asked the enslaved what they thought of breadfruit, though. They hated it, refused to eat it, and fed it to the pigs instead. 40 years of breadfruit rotting on Caribbean plantations followed, while the people it was meant to feed rejected it completely. The taste ran bland, with some comparing it to undercooked potato, and others saying it reminded them of wallpaper paste, but the real reason cut deeper than flavor. Breadfruit represented their oppression as the crop their enslavers forced upon them, nothing more than cheap rations and control. They said no. Slavery had been abolished for decades by the time breadfruit became accepted in Jamaica, taking until the 1830s for locals to embrace it. Today, it stands as a beloved staple of Jamaican cuisine, with the tree that was weaponized becoming just food again. But here's the thing, while breadfruit fought for redemption in the Caribbean, it was disappearing everywhere else. Breadfruit cultivation declined worldwide over the past century as people cut down trees, especially in urban areas where food preferences changed and imported rice and wheat replaced traditional staples. The knowledge of how to grow and prepare breadfruit faded into obscurity. Hawaii, where breadfruit had been cultivated for 800 years after Polynesian voyagers brought it in the 12th century, saw the trees become ornamental as people forgot what they were for. Climate change arrived, and suddenly the forgotten tree became the most relevant crop on Earth. Northwestern University researchers published a study in August 2022 that should have made headlines worldwide. They wanted to know how climate change would affect breadfruit cultivation, so they ran the models and looked at two scenarios, one where emissions keep rising and one where they stabilize, projecting conditions between 2060 and 2080. The results surprised everyone involved. Rice, corn, soybeans, and wheat faced devastating losses from climate change, while breadfruit cultivation areas would only decrease by 4.4 to 4.5%. Not 40% or even 20%, less than 5%. Daniel Horton, the lead researcher, described breadfruit as a neglected species that happens to be relatively resilient in climate projections, noting that while other staple crops struggle in really hot conditions with decreasing yields, breadfruit keeps producing. The numbers tell a stark story. 673 million people faced hunger worldwide in 2024, representing 8% of the global population, while 2.3 billion people experienced food insecurity. Africa saw over 20% of its population, 307 million people, facing hunger. Current trends continuing means 512 million people could be chronically undernourished by 2030, with 60% of them in Africa, the same continent where breadfruit could expand most easily. 20% of Africa suits breadfruit cultivation right now, according to the study. Southeast Asia looks even better at 80% suitable, and the Pacific Islands reach nearly perfect at 88% suitable with excellent quality. These trees aren't there yet, though, as the infrastructure doesn't exist and the knowledge was lost. Dr. Diane Ragone enters the story here. 1989 brought Ragone to the National Tropical Botanical Garden in Hawaii with a doctorate in horticulture and a mission: save breadfruit diversity before it disappeared forever. The next 30 years took her to 51 Pacific Islands, collecting varieties, documenting traditional knowledge, and building the largest breadfruit conservation collection in the world. 150 different cultivars emerged from her search. Some stood rare, some had already gone extinct in their home islands, and each fruit develops from 1,500 to 2,000 individual flowers that you can see as hexagon-like discs on the skin. Pacific Islanders had carefully bred every variety over thousands of years, and she preserved them all. Her studies identified which varieties had the best nutrition, the highest yields, and the most resilience. 2003 marked the establishment of the Breadfruit Institute with a simple mission statement: promote the conservation, study, and use of breadfruit for food and reforestation. The Institute has distributed nearly 200,000 trees to over 50 countries and territories worldwide since then. Two varieties became the focus of her work: Ma'afala from Samoa and Otea from Tahiti. Both varieties are seedless and vigorous with high nutrition, and most importantly, both can be mass-produced through tissue culture, meaning tiny plants grown in labs and shipped worldwide in flat containers holding 72 saplings each. The Trees That Feed Foundation launched in 2008 when two Jamaican-born breadfruit enthusiasts named Mary and Mike McLaughlin partnered with the Institute. Tens of thousands of trees have reached 18 countries through their work, spreading across Africa, the Caribbean, Central and South America, landing in places where food insecurity hits hardest. One Canadian tissue culture facility produced over 100,000 Myofala and Otea plants in just 2 years, 2020 and 2021, despite the pandemic shutting down operations worldwide. 1,800 trees shipped to Kenya in December 2021, and 3 more flats went to Guinea the following January. Distributing trees solves only part of the problem, though. People need to want to eat breadfruit. That's been the challenge all along. Breadfruit ripens quickly after harvest and bruises easily, making fresh export like bananas impossible. For breadfruit to work as a global food source, preservation becomes necessary, and the solution is flour. Dry the fruit and mill it into powder. Breadfruit suddenly lasts for months after that simple process. Gluten-free status combines with a low glycemic index between 47 and 72, making it beneficial for diabetics, while 100 grams provides 25% of your daily fiber needs. Complex carbohydrates, essential amino acids, and 48% of your daily vitamin C fill the profile, delivering more than bananas or jackfruit, and minerals that white rice completely lacks show up too, including beta-carotene and lutein. Protein content in some breadfruit flour reaches 7.6%, similar to rice. Unlike most plant proteins, though, breadfruit is especially rich in essential amino acids like phenylalanine, leucine, isoleucine, and valine. Patagonia, the outdoor clothing company, launched breadfruit crackers in 2020 after 6 years building the supply chain in Costa Rica. Small farmers growing trees in agroforests partnered with them, the drying and milling process got developed, and the first large-scale commercial breadfruit product emerged. 3 flavors of certified gluten-free crackers hit shelves with breadfruit flour as the first ingredient. Patagonia temporarily discontinued them due to quality issues, but they proved something valuable. Breadfruit could work in modern food systems, meaning a company could source it, process it, and bring it to market successfully. What makes breadfruit remarkable goes beyond just surviving climate change. 200 fruits per year can come from a single tree, with some Tanzanian farmers reporting yields up to 900 fruits from particularly productive specimens. 800 pounds of food annually from one tree becomes possible, and the trees require no pesticides or chemical fertilizers while growing in agroforestry systems, mixed farms with different crops at different heights. These systems build soil health, prevent erosion, and sequester carbon, with each tree absorbing 1.5 tons of carbon dioxide as it grows. Bearing fruit begins in 4 to 7 years, though the Myofala variety can start producing in just 2.5 to 3 years, and then they produce for 50 years or more. Some Pacific Island traditions involve planting a breadfruit tree when a child is born, with that one tree feeding the child for their entire life. Compare that to corn, which demands replanting annually. Potatoes deplete soil nutrients. Rice requires flooded fields and intensive labor. Wheat needs specific climate conditions and fertilizer inputs. Breadfruit offers something else the world desperately needs: food sovereignty. Communities growing their own staple crops avoid dependence on global supply chains and vulnerability to price shocks or export restrictions. A village with breadfruit trees has guaranteed food security for half a century from a single planting. The question isn't whether breadfruit can help solve global hunger, as the research proves it can. Whether we'll act fast enough remains the real question. Breadfruit cultivation hasn't expanded into its full suitable range right now. The trees could grow across huge portions of sub-Saharan Africa where food insecurity hits worst, but that requires investment, training, infrastructure for processing and storage, and changing food preferences that took generations to establish. Most importantly, overcoming the legacy of weaponization matters. That history still carries weight. Caribbean breadfruit still bears its past as the tree forced upon the enslaved and the crop that represented control. Jamaica loves it now, but 40 years of rejection came first. The enslaved workers claimed their autonomy by refusing the food their oppressors provided, choosing hunger over submission. That resistance was powerful and necessary. It stood as an act of defiance against dehumanization. The crop that could have fed millions got dismissed, though, because of how it was introduced, locking away breadfruit's potential for decades. A different kind of urgency faces us today. Climate change isn't waiting for us to sort out our complicated feelings about colonial history. 673 million. People are hungry right now, and that number is projected to grow. Breadfruit won't solve everything, as no single crop can. One Pacific agricultural scientist put it plainly, "No crop is a silver bullet when it comes to food security and hunger." Breadfruit is part of the solution, though, a tree producing for 50 years, surviving droughts and storms, building soil instead of depleting it, and capable of growing in the exact places where hunger hits worst. Dr. Ragone is now Director Emeritus of the Breadfruit Institute after spending 40 years collecting, studying, preserving, and distributing breadfruit varieties. 2024 brought her the David Fairchild Medal for Plant Exploration, one of the highest honors in botany, recognizing her work ensuring that breadfruit's genetic diversity survived, that knowledge wasn't lost, and that when climate change made the crop essential, we'd be ready. The tree weaponized for slavery is now a weapon against hunger, not because anyone forced it to be, but because researchers like Ragone saw its potential, because farmers in Costa Rica and Kenya and Haiti chose to plant it, and because communities that had rejected it gave it a second chance. Austronesian voyagers carried breadfruit across the Pacific in wooden canoes 3,000 years ago. They brought the trees to islands where they didn't naturally grow, cultivated them, bred them, and created 150 distinct varieties, each adapted to different conditions, different tastes, and different needs. Those ancient farmers understood something that modern agriculture forgot. The best crops work with nature rather than against it. Trees producing for generations, food systems building soil, and farming creating abundance without destruction define that understanding. Breadfruit remembers that wisdom. 40 years of Caribbean rejection followed its arrival, and the enslaved were right to refuse it, not because of the tree's fault, but because it represented everything wrong with their world. Their resistance asserted humanity in the face of a system treating them as property. A world facing climate catastrophe and mass hunger finds breadfruit offering something different now. Not redemption for the British Empire that tried to weaponize it, as they don't deserve that, but a path forward for all of us who need to eat in a hotter and more unstable world. A tree living 50 years, producing 800 pounds of food annually, surviving what's coming, already growing in 90 countries, waiting to expand into the places that need it most. Maybe the enslaved workers who fed breadfruit to pigs weren't rejecting the tree itself, but rejecting the system that tried making it a tool of oppression. The tree was always innocent, always generous, and always resilient. It's still here, still producing, and still offering what it always has: abundance, nutrition, resilience, and hope. The question is whether we're finally ready to accept the gift on the right terms, not as a tool of control or cheap rations, but as what it always was, a tree feeding people for generations. Captain Bligh made 2 voyages and survived a mutiny to deliver breadfruit to the Caribbean. Dr. Ragone made 51 voyages to 51 islands to save it from extinction. Between them lies a century and a half, slavery's abolition, and the slow redemption of a weaponized crop. Now it's our turn. 673 million people are waiting.